Welcome to Keeping the World Company on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about religion. Religion is changing in the world and in the country while we watch. How is it changing America and the global order? Our co-host for the show is Tim Apicella. Our guests for the show are Ben Davis, Gene Rosenfeld, and Manfred Henningsen. Welcome to the show, all of you. Religion has a huge effect on geopolitics, and we don't talk about it enough. This discussion will help us understand how pervasive and influential it is in today's chaotic world. So we're going to examine changes in religion in the US and around the world. Let me start with you, Ben. How religious is Donald Trump?
I don't think he's religious at all. I just think that religious people are a market that he's trying to sell himself to. And so, he will mouth the words, but I seriously doubt he's ever opened the Bible, to be honest.
Don't the Christian nationalists know this?
Well, I think that the way I've heard it understood is that he's a useful tool for their purposes, right? I mean, one of the things that he does, for example, and I'm not sure he really cares, but he's very strong on Israel. So the Christian nationalists like him because they got, particularly the Christian Zionists, who are going towards the end times are supposed to happen and all that. It goes all down that road. And so it seems to be, like fighting what I would call anti-Semitism on the left, which they like. But what's irreconcilable is that, when the second coming happens, all the Jews are supposed to become Christians, which is like the most anti-Semitic thing I can imagine, So, you know what I mean? But that's the logic of it. It's kind of all mixed up like that, and it gets them votes, and they can get where they want to go with various social things. I think, social desires like anti-abortion, whatever, that kind of thing, through him. So. It's a deal with the devil, so to speak.
And, Christian nationalism is something that I had no exposure to at all when I grew up. I didn't know any Christian nationalists. And do the Christian nationalists, how much do they respect or disrespect the other religions? Why are we talking only about Christian nationalists in America today? What happened to all the other religions, Ben?
Yes. Why don't we just start with the idea of Christians? Okay. So, I'll get to the other religions too, but let's start with the Christians, right? I mean, among Christians, right? There are Christians who have a wide series of beliefs which seem to fall in line with what Jesus said. The Christian nationalists don't seem, and to a certain extent, to cover what Jesus is. And the classic joke was the pastor was preaching Jesus in church, and then afterward, one of the people came up to him and said, "What's all this stuff you're talking about taking care of the poor and all that stuff?" He says, "I'm just preaching, Jesus' Sermon on the Mount." Well, we got to move away from all that. It's like in Christianity, leave aside, Hinduism or Judaism or Islam and all that. But, there are these kind of intense streaks, I think, in each one of the religions, right? They're sort of do unto others you do as you'd like them to do unto you, kind of everywhere. And then there's sort of these, we're the only ones in the room, and I can tell you a joke along those lines among the various sects of Christians, but I've got one joke so far, but
Well, jokes are plentiful around religion, honestly. And I was walking in my neighborhood yesterday, and there's a woman there who has tried for a long time to proselytize me to become Christian, which is, I suppose that's part of her thing. So I said to her and her family, they were all standing there. I said, "I understand you guys are converting to Hinduism." And they all nearly fainted, because that was about the furthest thing in the world for them. Yeah. They didn't know anything about it. They weren't going to tolerate it. They weren't going to respect it, as a matter of fact. And I think there's a lot of that. You're in your own narrow silo in this country, and you don't want to change. But it is changing, right, Gene? Religion is changing. It's always been with us in America, but it's changing. Can you talk about the changes that we've seen taking place only in the past decade or two?
Well, on the one hand, it's always changing. So, yes, and particularly in America, which allows religions to change and new religions to arise. Whereas in the other Western countries, there isn't the tolerance or the history of the sects that came from Europe that were driven out of Europe, beginning with the Puritans. That kind of sectarianism has never been tolerated by state Christian religions in the Western world. But we have that in America, which is one reason why in the Constitution we have the freedom of religion and the separation of church and state. If we didn't have that, and it's breaking down right now, that's one of the big changes. We would have what we have now, which is a threat that a particular type of set of religions wants to get rid of our civil government and allow God to rule, except for sheriffs on the local level and the military on the national level. And of course, you will have an executive, but he will listen only to God. That is the view of what's called dominionism. It precedes Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism is sort of a code word that was recently invented to include a variety of long-term traditions here, including the racist Christian tradition of Christian identity, which has informed Aryan nation, of the National Apostolic Revolution, which is a set of mega churches and mega congregations that believe that we have to make a post-millennial kingdom of God here on earth. And Trump alluded to that very smartly in his inauguration address, as that we are waiting for the kingdom of God right now. The Golden City is coming. It's much more than Reagan's city on a hill. It's almost here, and he's going to make it happen.
Well, the Christian national city. What troubles me is that none of the other religions buy into that or associated with it.
There is a set of these religions. Some precede what's called Christian nationalism, which is a recent term, and which I wouldn't use. It's too inexact for me. But it's true that the junction between nationalism and Christianity has closed. So we have now this middle ground where politics and religion are very much in league with one another. And within Christian communities, there is this division. There's a big division in the Catholic Church right now. And you'll see that in the conclave, and you'll see it now.
What's the division, Jean?
The division is between those recent converts like J.D. Vance, who have brought their Protestant traditions of the Holy Spirit and enthusiasm into the Catholic Church, and who feel no compunction in standing side by side with the Pope and talking back to him. No traditional Catholic would ever do that, because Catholicism is an intellectual tradition of theology and interpretation that is having to do with major philosophies in the last 2,000 years. And Catholics understand that that takes a whole education, takes a lot more than a simple conversion for 6 years. So that's one segment. The other are certain sects, which you would call cults, within the Catholic Church. The cult of Mary truly is a cult because she is worshipped specifically by certain people. There is that people of praise that Amy Coney Barrett belongs to, who are very, very in league with trad wife traditions and the ultra-conservative MAGA part of politics. So they brought that into the church. And then there's the Opus Dei, which has been there for a long time, which wants to keep the Latinate Mass and never change in the Catholic Church, which changes glacially anyway. I mean, Francis is going to be seen as not just a reformed pope, but a pope who tried to institute real changes. Whether or not that's going to continue, we'll see when the next pope is elected.
Well, let's go to Tim on this. Tim, Jean mentioned the First Amendment and the bar, the prohibition of establishing a state religion. Boy, it really feels like we're getting one. And there's also in the First Amendment is this freedom of religion. and to practice any way you want, any religion. And we seem to have lost that. My recollection, by the way, and I would like your comment about this, is the deal was at the founding that there was not a lot of freedom of religion in old Europe. And we wanted to have freedom of religion here. And we didn't want to have a state religion. Okay, that's really important. So the deal struck was we will not, you can have tax exemption. We'll let you do what you want in your church. Just don't mess with the other religions. And we will give you tax exemption. And the inherent condition of the tax exemption is that you won't try to affect politics. All of that seems to be in a cocked hat right now. So my question to you, Tim, is what happened? How come it eroded as badly as it has?
Oh, what happened is a guy we called affectionately President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. In his campaign to become president, he opened the doors for the evangelical Christians to come into the party. I'm specifically referring to the moral majority, Jerry Falwell. Come on in, the more the merrier, the water's warm. You'll see that this president is going to be beneficial to the evangelical churches of the United States. And by gosh, it was the evangelicals that was a major support of the Ronald Reagan administration. We saw all sorts of policies adapt and mend because of Ronald Reagan's green light for religions to come into politics. And let me just take a little sharp turn here, right or left, is that my concern about religions and politics is the following. Religion is the business, and it is a business, the business of faith. And with faith, facts are not relevant. It is a belief system, whether it's factual or not, whether it's in the Old Testament, New Testament, or the Mormon Bible. It's a matter of faith. And so when you have a politician that has a certain segment of population following them that are faith-based, what I say at the podium isn't important, whether it's factual or not. In the days of politics, we used to say as an audience, as voters, saying, is that true? Is that factual? And there'd be something called fact checking. Well, when a big portion of your followers that vote for you are faith-based, facts aren't relevant. They're not important. And if you're caught in a bold-faced lie, which Donald Trump certainly has been, 30,000 in his first administration and thousands since then, the facts don't matter because you're our cheerleader for our religious beliefs. And we know that through religious beliefs in your administration, we will have more influence and more power in this government. It is the power of religion and the influence of our government policies and implementation of policies.
No, but that's exactly what we have. And part of the transformation of religion in this country is that somewhere along the line, not too long ago, they have become very determined to influence government. All kinds of issues. You don't have to think long and hard to think of all the issues that these various churches are active on in state legislatures and in the federal government. And so my question is, how important are they now? Tim, are they more important or less important than they were before? Are they trying harder to influence policy in government? Are they giving more money? I think the answer to that is they certainly are. Trump is looking to them for support, for monetary support. So the change is really profound, but how profound exactly? Are they more influential than they should be?
Well, I would say ask all the women, the millions of women are impacted by the Dobbs decision. That would be my first entree to your answer your question. They are horribly influential. We have a recent decision that the Catholic school, I think in Oklahoma, has now going to receive full funding from public funds to operate as a faith-based religion education. That has been eroding for the last 40 years, again, beginning with Ronald Reagan. Look at what they're getting away with at the pulpit. You mentioned tax exemption. Well, if I remember, the code is the second you start talking about politics at the pulpit or at the podium, your tax exemption is at risk. That's not happening anymore. All politics are fair game in the churches. A variety of churches, and I don't think that's what the tax code had in mind. But it's happening. So we're seeing an erosion of the firewall between not just the evangelical churches, but as Gene has suggested, conservative Catholic churches and other organizations. And if I'm Muslim, if I'm Jewish, if I'm Hindi, if I'm Taoist, this is terribly upsetting to me because there's an influence that's going beyond my scope of control and my ability to live as an independent person of faith, regardless of that faith.
Let me look at Europe for a minute. Manfred, I read recently that religion, this is really surprising because I thought religion was like old hat in Europe. Religion is having a comeback. And there were more people signing up and going to church in Europe, all around Europe, than there were before. Why is that true? And why is it?
I think it's half true because a lot of people have left churches in Germany, especially the Lutheran Church as well as the Catholic Church. So for that reason, I think it may be connected to some extent with the migration issue and the presence of Islam in France, in the Netherlands, in Germany. But I do not think that is an issue. But what I dislike about this discussion so far is that it's focusing primarily on America. And I mean, the appeal of the Catholic Church at this point, during the conclave period, is, I think, an indication of how important religion is in the world, not only in the United States, positively, you could say, and negatively. But I mean, you have to remember that one third of the world population is Christian in one way or the other. It's an extraordinary appeal, of Christianity. And if you want to have an update on all of these issues, read Elaine Pagel's new book, Miracles and Wonders, the Historical Mystery of Jesus. This is a stunning discussion, including American nationalism. You asked at the beginning, Ben, whether Trump is a religious person. I think David Brooks gave a wonderful answer when he said, no, he's a pagan. And I think that applies to almost everything that he says. And this really incredible caricature that he agreed to put on his platform, when he was dressing up as Pope, or someone dressed him up as Pope, but he endorsed that and he considered that quite funny. He quoted his wife, who's a Catholic, said that she liked it. And he said, Catholics like it. Last night, I had dinner in a Vietnamese restaurant where the owner is a woman. She's a refugee from Vietnam. She was a teenager. She's Catholic. And she was really upset, not only by what Trump did. She thought it was absolutely sickening, but how Americans have accepted it and make fun of it. So what you have, at this moment, on the one hand, you have this extraordinary theatrical performance, of the selection of the new Pope. And if, you want to get artistic representations of that, watch the two movies, the two popes and the one on the conclave. It's absolutely stunning because what you have there in these two movies is a reflection of what is happening now. And you had the first black smoke coming out of the chimney in Rome. This battle over the universal appeal or the somewhat more restricted appeal of the Catholic Church in the future will have a tremendous impact. Remember, you have more Christians today in China than members of the Communist Party. You have 80 million Christians in China, and you have fewer 70 million or 60 million members of the Communist Party. Now, the same applies to India, where you have the Dalit people, the lowest segment of Indian society being Christian. You have it in Peru. You have it. So what you are talking about, you're not only talking here about American Christian. You have to remember, it's not only the Puritans that characterize this sometimes crazy variety of American Christianity. It begins before that. The Anabaptists, they were the radical Christians during the German Reformation. And these Anabaptists are the predecessors of the Amish and the Mennonites. So they came before the Puritans to America and continued to come. America has always been, attracting all kinds of crazy Christian denominations.
Well, Manfred, let's go back to outside the U.S. The Crusades were violent. The Crusades were a Christian event. And I couldn't say, maybe you can, the relationship of the Crusades and the reaction by Islam. We have Islam, which gets involved in proselytizing by violence, and which gets involved in war and terrorism on a regular basis, probably more than the Crusades ever did. Look at the Middle East right now. And the other part is that I'm interested in your explanation of why the Communist Party has allowed Christianity to grow, because the Communist Party for a long time was considered religion. It was a religion, and you had to better follow that religion or you would pay a price. And so I'm wondering, that we have these sweeping changes all around the globe. And it's not just the emergence of terrorism connected with Islam in the Middle East and North Africa. It's what's happening, as you say, in China. It's what's happening in Europe. And I suggest to you, and you can tell me if it's true or not, that the people who are going to church now in Europe are changing religion. And I'll ask Jean in a minute, the people who are going to Christian nationalism in this country used to be something else. So there's a sort of a migration, and it's based on proselytization. It's based on promotion. I tell you, I follow the technology around video making, and a good part of the video industry is dedicated to selling religion to people and getting them to come to church and put something in the plate. And it's in a fantastic promotional experience. So not only, it seems to me, people are moving from one to the other, but they are being sold on a bill of goods about that, and it's happening all over the world. Manfred, tell us about the Crusades. Tell us about how Islam is responding.
You have to, when you're talking about Islam, and you gave somewhat a caricature of Islam, contemporary Islam. The largest Islamic country in the world is Indonesia, and the Islam in Indonesia is a moderate version. It's not comparable, with what you have in the Middle East. When you're talking about China, you have to remember that most of these Christian churches are underground churches, especially the Protestant churches. So they are preaching, underground. They are not public. The Catholic Church is different, and you have there an agreement between Francis and the Chinese government to accept the choice of the selection of bishops. That created some problems, within the structure of the Catholic Church, but you have this acceptance, of this relationship between the Chinese state and the Vatican. Now, when you talk about the revival of church going in Europe, I think that is an exaggerated phenomenon. I do not think, for example, it applies to Germany, and it doesn't apply to the Scandinavian churches, the Lutheran churches either. So in all of those churches, you have a declining presence of people going to church. So you don't have this revivalism enthusiasm that you seem to have in the United States, that you were talking about, and that somehow scares the shit out of all of you. I do not think it applies to most European, including Italy. Now, Francis had an impact, a positive impact in Italy. I mean, apart from the fact that he spoke good Italian, being having Italian ancestors, but I think you exaggerate.
Thank you for that. Let's go to Ben for a minute. You know, Ben, looking at it from a constitutional, from a societal point of view, from an American democracy point of view, how does religion play in all of this? It strikes me that it offers sort of an alternative, and in fact, a lot of people feel that religion is it's not good for democracy. It's not good for the country. And that the two are competing systems. They compete to get your attention, to get your money, to get your support. And when we see religion growing in this country and maybe in other places too, we should be concerned that democracy is at the other end of that battle. Your thoughts?
Well, Jay, if you send $1,000 to this phone number below my name here, I will be happy to let you know all the religious ideas that you need to have for the rest of your life, and will my telephone call to God work to make sure your life is okay. I mean, that's the one literal. You think I'm just joking here, folks, but that is a very real part of the American religious space. What is it called? It's called the Prosperity Bible, huh?
Prosperity Gospel.
The Prosperity Gospel, and it had, it's kind of tied up with that sort of thing that if you are rich, it's because you're blessed by God, that you are kind of, sort of anointed, which is, of course, basically a step, a significant step away from equality. But on the issue, you can go back to James Madison. Since I'm here in Charlottesville, I've gone out to his plantation, and back in the day, there was an official religion in Virginia. Now you could be some other religion. I think it was Episcopal. You could be some other religion, but if you wanted to preach, you had to get a license, and it was hard to get a license. And I mean, there was all these things that made it, freedom of religion, but it was hard to be anything but the official one, right? And Madison saw that, and that was part of, one of the reasons that that language was put into the Constitution about freedom of religion and the Establishment Clause and all that, because he saw the bad implications of it.
Well, one of those implications today, and for example, you have these two alternative systems. One draws against the other. Is this good for democracy? And if not, how is it affecting our democracy? Because, as opposed to earlier times in the founders' perception of it, religion was, not supposed to be a state religion. Let me add, by the way, whatever value this is, when I was in the service, there was a rule in the wardroom on every naval ship. And it was that when you got into the wardroom with your co-officers and all, there were two subjects that you could not discuss. One was politics. That was a good idea because not everybody agreed on politics. And the other was religion. And that left you with a small set of subjects, a smaller set. But the fact is, there was a good reason to have those rules. We don't have those rules anymore.
No.
There are people who are trying to proselytize you on the internet and everywhere else. What effect does that have on our society?
The thing that popped into my mind while you were talking was that I think it's a famous quote of Lincoln during the Civil War, where the Union people were saying that God was on their side, and then the Confederates were saying God was on their side, and Lincoln said, I'm just hoping that we're on God's side in what we're doing, and which was a vision of sort of your humility as a human in front of the deity, so to speak. You can't know this. The other one that came to mind was, I think it's in St. Augustine's, where he is walking along the beach, and there's this little girl, and she's digging a hole, and he looks at the little girl and says, "What are you doing?" And she says, "I'm digging a hole to put the ocean in." And St. Augustine said, "Oh, you silly little girl, you can't put the whole ocean in that hole that you're making." And she looks at him and says, "Well, how do you think you can get the greatness of God inside that little head of yours?" And she disappeared because she was an angel. You see what I'm saying? I mean, these things are like amazing, right? But, when people start to say to you, well, God is on my side, it's there's a kind of, I don't know, radar that goes on, because how can you possibly know whether there, first of all, whether there is a deity? That's a whole debate in itself. But assuming there is a deity, what kind of deity it is, and to know the vastness in this little brain of ours, this little brain. The little
Yeah.
humility is not something that you see a lot of.
For some reason, politics and government and democracy seems to be going in one direction, and religion goes in another direction. And I'm reminded of the clash of civilizations, Jane. Religion is at play right now in the war between Israel and the United States versus Iran, a theocracy. Religion is at play in the current conflict between India and Pakistan. Religion, I mean, although yes, there are moderate Muslims, in the east side of Asia and all that, like in Indonesia, like Manfred said. But there are also Muslims who are not so moderate, and then we have response to that, and so we have the clash of civilization, and it's troubling not only because it's happening in the Middle East and North Africa, but conceivably it could happen somewhere else. My religion's better than yours, and I'm going to take violence to establish that point. Anyway, can you talk about that, Jane?
I can. Let me first put in a few disclaimers. Yes, the Anabaptists preceded the Puritans, I know that, but the Puritans are the ones that are the direct ancestors of what's happening with Christian nationalism today, which is why I brought them up. Secondly, yes, there are a lot of Catholics in the world, and religion is ubiquitous. Even where there's secularism, there's religion, because I got a doctorate in history of religions, and the way we define it is by ultimate concern. Anything that you feel you live your life by, principles, and anything you commit yourself to die for, that's ultimate concern. It was defined by Paul Tillich after World War II, and he saw the false god in Hitler, and he tried to return people to a sense of mystery and awe, which is the divine in every religion. So when you say, let's talk about religion, to me, it's very frustrating, because it's like you're saying, talk about the universe. And we can't do that in 50 minutes. However, with respect to the Middle East and North Africa, there is something that arose there in Islam called Salafism. Salafism is a response to modernity. And what it is, it's like the ultra-Orthodox Jews and the, what I should say, ultra-conservative Christians, and wanting to return to tradition, because the modern world is breaking down all of the guardrails that religion organizes, gives us a sense of order in the world. It orients us to the world. That's why we can't do without it. It organizes society. It gives a moral basis to everything. And when people see that breaking down, they sometimes respond and react in extreme ways. And that's what Salafism is. The difference between Salafism and jihadism, which is an offshoot of Salafism in Islam, is that Salafism is peaceful. It doesn't want to engage in politics. Jihadism is politics. It started with the assassination of Anwar Sadat and the theological reasons for that. And it branched off into Al-Qaeda and ISIS, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and what we see today. And this extreme movement that has not, they've killed more Muslims than they have killed non-Muslims. And it is an extreme, violent reform movement within Islam. In the Middle East, those terrorist organizations right now that are aligned, whether they're Sunni or Shia, which is like Protestantism and Catholicism and Christianity, have gotten together. The extremists have gotten together because they are so anti-Israel and because they want to reform their own societies or revolutionize them from within. They want to restore the caliphate. The caliphate was before the Ottoman Empire. It goes back to the 1200s. That's the school of Islam they belong in, the jihadists. That was Al-Qaeda. And the first guy to found Al-Qaeda, who most people don't know about, was a Palestinian cleric. So you see, the Middle East has, in a sense, radicalized Islam as well as created a cauldron of religious tension where there used to be basically there were guardrails and there was tolerance if there wasn't sympathy. It's like Yugoslavia was held together by this benevolent dictator, and once he died and it fell apart, then you had Serbs and Croats and people from Kosovo, Islam, Catholics, non-Catholics, Orthodox Greeks going against one another. That's what's happened in the Middle East. When a political order breaks down, people resort to meaning in life by returning to religion. And then if they find reason in religion to be intolerant, that creates war. I would quote the great deceased scholar in religions, Houston Smith, who said one time that he really believes that at the root of all the great conflicts in human history is religion. And I have to believe him.
All right, Tim, do you agree with that? Let me add, by the way, that in the state of Hawaii, there was a death with dignity bill, and the Catholic Church opposed it. And it took more than 20 years of lobbying and conversation around the legislature to actually get that bill passed. And it was passed in, what do you want to call it, watered down form. And then, of course, you have Roe v. Wade, which the Catholic Church has fought. Really, really fought for years and years and years. And McQueary, is that necessary for the religion? Where does that come from? Could we have a country? Here's the big question. Could we have a country without religion? Or better put, couldn't we go back to the First Amendment? And would we survive without this kind of religious proselytization, which is going on right now? Because I would say, see if you agree, that religion, as Gene suggested, is a very negative experience in society. Yes, at some level, psychologically perhaps, we need the structure of religion, but it has gone off the side.
USSR tried that. They tried to abolish religion, and what happened is it went underground and became more important to Russian citizens to follow a faith versus a doctrine. As far as power, let's just look at unbridled power. Any political type like Trump or Erdogan or all of these guys, how convenient is it to use religion? I'll say the manipulation of religion. Not religion is making a problem, it's the manipulation of religion that gives you the political power to have a following. And so it's so easy to use religion as one of your tools of propaganda. And again, as I said in my earlier piece, you don't need facts to support your positions. You just need faithful followers. And that's the benefit of religion in politics. So should we go back to a strong firewall between church and state? Yes, please. Will we ever eliminate it? No, we won't. But sometimes to keep things at bay rather than a complete overtake is good enough. And I don't think we're there. And I think the national Christians are making headway, and they're going to make life miserable for those of religion and those of non-religion. Let's not forget the atheists. They have a stake in this country. They have the right to be citizens of the United States and believe, or in this case, not believe, that which they wish. So let's get back to these days where religion is not paramount to all things political.
Manfred, you made a reference before that caught my attention about the dictators in Europe and how they were filling a void, if you will, left by religion, or at least they were making themselves into religious icons. And I just wonder, on the flip side of what I asked Tim, what about we make a given polity into a theocracy? Won't that work? In other words, don't have the competition between ordinary politics and religion. Let's just go right to the end of the game and have the thing run, have the country run by religion. Wouldn't that work? Maybe wouldn't that be simpler? And didn't that happen in a funny way with Hitler?
No, I don't think Hitler created a substitute religion replacing Christianity. I mean, you have tensions between the resistance part of the Lutheran Church and the Catholic Church as well. But I mean, Tim talked about Russia and the USSR. You have to remember that the Orthodox Church, the Orthodox Christian Church, supported whoever was in power in Russia, from the czars through Stalin to Putin. There was never a disagreement between power and religion. So the religion had always been in Russia, despite all of the regime changes, supportive of the regime. Now in the United States, there's one thing that I find interesting today is when you read the columns of the intellectuals that you find in the media, for example, David Brooks and Carol Thomas, they agree on one thing. They are against this politicization, this influence of religion on the political discourse. I mean, Carol Thomas asked the question, do Christians need Trump's White House faith office? What is this faith office for? I mean, as I said in response to Ben's comment earlier, Trump is a pagan. And I think David Brooks in his article makes that quite clear, that he does not have any connection with religion one way or the other. Whether he has opened the Bible or not doesn't really matter. He is not a religious person.
No, but he has learned how to weaponize religion.
That's true.
And I think every dictator and wannabe dictator tries that because they know how powerful it is to be able to bring the flock along. Time for closing statements. Ben, can you give us your thoughts going forward? And one of them might be, what do we do about this problem? Because it seems to be getting worse. And we means the country.
I guess I would say it this way, is that, religion gets a bad name and religion gets a good name, just like power gets a bad name and power gets a good name. It depends on what it's doing. I mean, there are aspects of, for example, taking care of the poor that religious institutions work very hard to do at points in time when basically power ignored the poor. I mean, they were the only ones that were there, coming out of some deep faith that people had. At the same time, I absolutely agree with everyone else, is this manipulation of power and religion together to impose a kind of worldview is something that is very, very dangerous. So I guess where I end up is, believe it or not, at a wedding I went to in Paris many years ago between a French woman and a German man. The German was a German Protestant, and the French woman was a Catholic. And they decided to have an ecumenical wedding where they had both a pastor and a priest. And there was love between the couple, right? And there were the two priests and the pastor who were, giving their homilies, and it was hilarious. I'm sorry to say, because they were giving shots at each other with regards to their religions. I mean, the pastor was saying, "It's really happy to see that you all are getting married in the church, and would that our two churches could get along." And then the priest said, "Yes, it's very good that you're getting married in the church." And you understood when he said that it was just the Catholic Church. Forget about that other thing. And so that's the tension, because here's the love, this beautiful moment of this couple marrying, and there's this battling between these religions that's going on there. Um, um, just like so, I guess at the end of the day, what I can say is that having faith is good, but also having faith can be a bad too.
Well, Gene, what about that? The two sides of this coin. Does humanity need the two sides of this coin? Do we have to interact where power politics fails for some reason? For example, Ben's point, to take care of the poor. Okay, religion can step in, maybe do a better job for the right reason. So it does suggest that the two hands need to be clapping. On the other hand, one of them has to prevail to give humanity a better shot, a better life. And in your closing, can you tell us which one should prevail?
Well, first of all, I do not regard religion as a negative influence on society. When I was still almost a freshman in college, I wrote an essay on an atheist philosopher and said, if you do away with religion, you have no means of providing meaning in life for people or rules of moral engagement. So it is more fundamental than politics. And religion will always prevail. Because even when you think you're not religious, you're acting religiously because you're searching for meaning and you're looking for order in the universe and orientation in your own life. The Catholic Church has presided over the greatest number of charitable organizations in the world for many, many years. It has done enormous good in the world. Jewish organizations, Judaism, is very involved in charity also. And this is no surprise, because Christian ethics come directly out of Judaism and ancient Israelite religion. That one is a parent religion, one is a child, the rest are child religions. Rabbinic Judaism arose at the same time as Christianity in the century, out of the same social forces. So in a sense, religious conflict at the highest levels, religious leaders who get together from the various religions in the world, they get along just fine. They understand one another. They understand what the divine mystery is and what it is that people are needing in their personal lives. And there is so much that is attractive in each of the religions. At the same time, this is not communicated well enough, and people are who they are psychologically and socially. And so religion becomes the excuse or the reason for a lot of conflict.
Tim, there's two ways to do religion. And we've had this conversation. People in general have had this conversation over the years. Organized religion, where the church involved controls a third of the population of the world, and personal religion, where you learn from your minister how to live, and then you live that way. And you don't have to be part of an organized religion in order to achieve the principles that you learn. Your thoughts and your closing comments?
My thoughts are the following. To dress the language a little differently, in my world, there's a difference between spirituality and religion. The religion is the day-to-day dogma of what you believe. The spirituality is the overall philosophy that elevates you above this thing we call religion. And so there's some, like me, who try to find the spirituality within my religion. And I guess I'm referred to as a cafeteria Catholic, where I will go and pick certain things out of my religion, put them on my tray, and before I exit the cafeteria, I smile at the cashier and keep walking. I think it's important when it comes to politics and religion to remember that there's the spirituality. I am my brother's keeper. And yet at the same time, not use the power of religion as the power of politics to oppress my fellow man.
Yeah, thank you. Manfred, we're really out of time. So can you hold your comments to some reasonable period?
Yes, I agree with Gene. I think we are speaking here about the need for meaning that human are longing for. And religion is one way of, symbolically taking care of that. Now, whether that agrees with Tim's cafeteria notion of meaning, I don't know. But I think we should never forget that it's the need for meaning in life that people are longing for. And the state is not a substitute for that. And I think the best illustration for that is contemporary China, where the Communist Party is fighting for that superiority, but is constantly losing it when you're speaking with Chinese in China.
Okay, that's very valuable. So many important points today. We'll have to leave it there, though. Thanks so much to our esteemed guests, Ben Davis, Gene Rosenfeld, and Manfred Henningsen, with our co-host, Tim Apicella. I'm Jay Fidell, host of Keeping the World Company. We've been discussing religion is changing while we watch. Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha. Aloha, everybody.
Aloha.
Aloha.